Welcome back to my channel, guys. My name is Raggy, and today I am going to be listing off for you my top 6 Pokemon, not from any one game in particular, but my top 6 Pokemon that are legendaries. So my top 6 legendary Pokemon. Now, there's different categories of what legendary type Pokemon there are. There are mythical Pokemon, there are like sub-legendary, pseudo-legendary. So to clarify, it's going to be any legendary Pokemon except for pseudo-legendary. So if you don't know what a pseudo-legendary is, the Pokemon like Dragonite, Tyranitar, Metagross, Pokemon that are incredibly powerful and are usually listed near the bottom amongst the legendary Pokemon in their respective regions' decks. So those Pokemon are not going to be in this listing today. So getting into it, for any particular reason, in no particular order, I'm just going to be listing off right now my top 6 legendary Pokemon. So starting off this list is one of my all-time favorites, Zapdos. Now, do I like his Galarian form more or his regular form? Yeah. Yeah, I do. That is to say, I really can't choose between them. I mentioned Galarian Zapdos as being one of my favorites from Gen 8, that is Sword and Shield. And I think it's pretty easy to see why. It's not because he's overpowered, I just think his design is very cool. And both versions of him, regular or Galarian form, they are both absolutely awesome. I love the spiky look to his feathers. I love the long beak. I like his coloring, his typing. I think amongst the legendary bird trio, the original legendary trio, he is possibly the weak link. I hear a lot of people talk about Articuno, a lot of people talk about Moltres, but I'm here for Zapdos. This guy, he was always my first choice amongst those three, and I think that if you really look at it, he's still very competitively viable, and the same could be said of all of them, but he fills my niche a lot more, so there's that. Next on this list, we have Dialga. So I have mentioned previously in other videos that Diamond and Pearl was like the first Pokemon game that I really got to immerse myself in legitimately, that is, to play it on the actual handheld console and not on an emulator off my computer or something like that. And because Diamond was the first game I ever did with that, the first legendary Pokemon I was ever exposed to legitimately was Dialga. And you bet I wasted my Master Ball on this guy because I was a much younger player back then. I did not realize how much easier it would be to actually catch him in like an Ultra Ball or something than what it actually was. I believe I had one playthrough where I actually caught him in a Quick Ball. So he's not that hard to catch, but I was very young, or I was a lot younger than I am now. I was a lot more inexperienced. But this guy, like, maybe he's my favorite just because I chose Diamond, and maybe if I'd chosen Pearl, I would have this big affinity for Palkia. But I also remember that Dialga was like the main antagonist, if you will, or one of the major boss fights that you encounter in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time. And I played that game as well, and I remember thinking to myself, how cool is it that the legendary that was featured in the game I chose, it was also like featured as like a big villain in this other game that I played. Who knew, right? But yeah, Dialga has like a pretty unique design, I guess. It's like there's the only other Pokemon that look anywhere near like him are from the same gen, that is, say, Giratina and Palkia. But I like his coloring a lot more as well, and I think his typing is something very important. The Dragon Steel type, apparently, because that trio, that is Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, are actually based on like the creation of Earth, apparently their typing is actually supposed to be a reference to forms of matter. So you have Dialga, who's a reference to solid matter with steel, and then Palkia is a reference to liquid because he is a psychic water type. And then you also have Giratina, who's a ghost type, and that's gas. So that's actually pretty clever. But I appreciate that I got the solid one because steel is a cool typing, and he works for me. I like him a lot. Next on this list, probably a bit of a cop-out, kind of basic, but I'm going to say that one of my all-time favorite legendary Pokemon is actually Mewtwo. And I remember being a young child watching the anime, and I remember being all up in this mystery about this super powerful Pokemon that Giovanni had at the gym in Viridian City, right? It was mind-blowing because we saw that episode, my brothers and I, we saw this episode before we saw the movie in theaters. And it was like, we drew pictures of it when we were, you know, like the red string meme where the guy's like trying to solve like a conspiracy theory? Like, that was us trying to wrap our heads around like this mystery Pokemon. Never mind that he showed up routinely in the Pokemon rap. We never noticed. But we were obsessed with the mystery around Mewtwo. And when the movie came out and we actually watched it in cinemas, we were gobsmacked. This guy, yeah, there were legendary Pokemon in the show. There were legendary Pokemon in the game. You had like Zapdos and Moltres and Articuno. And you even see Ho-Oh on like the first episode. So it's like, we knew there were like legendary Pokemon, but this is the first time we were like immersed in like what a legendary Pokemon is and is capable of. We'd only really heard about like their power. And then you see Mewtwo, who's like, to this day for me, Mewtwo has always been like the standard of power a legendary Pokemon probably has. Because to me, when I was a child at the movies watching this, to me, it seemed like Mewtwo could do literally anything. There was no limit to his power. He was Superman. And the only thing that could stop him was Mew, who is the Pokemon he's cloned from. And he's got such a cool design because you remember he's a clone and he kind of looks like a science experiment. What with like the bit on his neck and he's like kind of like bulbous looking in places. He looks like a science experiment. He looks like what he's supposed to. He's a very powerful Pokemon. He's competitively viable in the meta. He's a great legendary. He might be my favorite legendary. And I don't care if you think that's basic. Even if it is, I'm standing by it. Next on this list is a Pokemon whose name I probably don't know how to say, but I'm going to say Yveltal. And that is one of the main legendary Pokemon from Pokemon X and Y. Specifically, Pokemon Y. So he and Xerneas, who is his counterpart Pokemon, and Zygarde, I suppose, are apparently a reference in some way or another to the World Tree or Yggdrasil from Norse mythology. Don't at me if I'm wrong. I probably am. But apparently they are a reference to the story of the World Tree. And while I don't necessarily see it, there's probably more about how I don't really know the myth that well. But I believe that the dynamic of making the Pokemon look like the respective letters, that is X, Y, and Z, is pulled off flawlessly. And I think especially in the case of Yveltal, with his giant tail being the bottom of the Y, it's I don't need to explain it. He looks like the letter Y. But they also made him look cool regardless. He's got cool coloring, he's got like a very unique like face shape with like the horn things and the eyes, and his color. Oh my god, his color. This might be the coolest coloring on any legendary Pokemon. Slap this color onto any other legendary Pokemon, and you've got something that looks like it eats nails for breakfast. That's all I can really say about Yveltal. Next on this list, I have chosen Genesect. Now, I was pretty well confused for a while there because Black and White, I did not really immerse myself in it that much. But my first exposure to Genesect was in one of the Pokemon OVAs. I found it for like $8 at like Big W or something. I picked it up and I'm like, I'm going to watch this. And it was a pretty good movie. And I was surprised to find that apparently there's not a Genesect. There's like a bunch of them, right? And they are... It was so weird because like he just takes up space in my head rent-free where I think about things like this a lot, where it's like, he's a legendary Pokemon, but there's many of him. But he's a machine, but he's still a Pokemon. But on top of all that, he's got a really cool, unique design. He's got a purple color, and then his shiny is bright red, and like there's just a lot of stuff to appreciate about Genesect. And I think Bug-type Pokemon are sorely underrated as well. They have a really, really awesome niche in the competitive realm, and I don't think there are quite enough Pokemon, or not quite enough legendary Pokemon based on the bug type. So if you really wanted to cover that base, I think Genesect fills that role kind of flawlessly. Absolutely. Again, I didn't really play that much of Black and White. I finished the first Black and White game. I played some of Black and White 2. I did not do anything in the meta or the post game or anything like that. So my understanding of how Genesect works is pretty limited. I just like him strictly from a design perspective, really. Lastly on this list, I am choosing Lunala, and that would be the legendary Pokemon from Pokemon Moon. And Lunala, similar to Genesect, I don't really know a lot about them in the competitive element, but I do like their design. It's a very unique coloring that we don't really see on any other Pokemon. And Lunala's entire line is interesting in that Lunala has a line that is an evolutionary line, because if I am not mistaken, Lunala evolves from Cosmog, who evolves into Don't ask me the other one's name. But it's like the only legendary Pokemon I can think of that actually comes from an evolution. And that's strictly unique to Lunala. Again, now, I didn't actually finish Sun and Moon, so it might be a bit of a cop-out to say that, oh, this is one of my favorite legendaries, but I like him from a design perspective. And if I'm getting anything wrong, it's because I didn't finish that game. And Sun and Moon is fine, it's just not my favorite. Didn't hold my attention that well. But I like both Solgaleo and Lunala, but I like Lunala more. As a rep for the Sun and Moon series, I think being based on the moon and kind of like look like a bat like that is very clever as well. So if only for those reasons, Lunala is definitely one of my favorites. And it might have been a completely different choice if I'd chosen Sun instead of Moon, but I chose Moon, so there you go. Doesn't matter. That's the one I looked at every time I picked up the game cover to play the game. Anyways, this has been my top 6 legendary Pokemon for any particular reason and in any order. If you enjoyed this video today, then please make sure to give it a like and to subscribe to the channel as well. Make sure to hit the bell icon as well so you can get instant updates anytime there's a new upload, and then you don't have to miss out on future content either. My name is Raggy. Thank you very, very much for making it to the end of the video today. If there's anything else you want to see me rap about, just mention it down in the comments and I'll get to it. In any case, thank you again. I'll see you guys next time.